Imagine for a second what it would take for you to leave behind your home, your family, and your entire identity to follow a total stranger into an unforgiving jungle. Most of us believe we could never be manipulated into making a choice like that, but nobody intentionally signs up for a movement they know will destroy them. In the mid-1970s, the United States was fractured. People were exhausted by rampant racism, by deep poverty and gaping inequality. They were desperate for a radical alternative to the outside world. And then they found what looked like a beautiful solution. Nearly 1,000 people were drawn to a political and religious community that promised a perfectly equal utopia. To those who felt marginalized, it felt like heaven on earth. These were hopeful, well-intentioned people who walked blindly into a meticulously designed psychological cage. To understand how that trap was built, we have to look at the architect. In 1930s Indiana, there was a neglected, impoverished little boy growing up in a deeply dysfunctional family. He was a lonely outcast, but the children around him noticed a chilling obsession with religion and death. He routinely conducted theatrical, bizarre funeral services for small animals, and even intentionally killed a cat with a knife just so he could bury it. As he grew into an adult, he realized that the church pulpit offered exactly what he craved. It was the perfect mechanism to manufacture an adoring community and secure absolute, unquestioned power over others. That strange, death-obsessed child was Jim Jones. Jones was a predator who identified society's most vulnerable people and weaponized their deepest hopes against them. Jones began adopting the deeply captivating, emotionally expressive preaching styles of the Black Pentecostal Church. He learned how to whip crowds into a frenzy. He looked his congregants in the eyes and actively groomed them, promising that if they didn't have a father, he would be their father. If they needed a God, he would be their God. To prove those claims, he started staging highly coordinated miracles. During one service, an allegedly paralyzed, blind elderly woman stood from her wheelchair and practically ran down the aisle as the congregation wept in awe. The crowd had no idea the woman was actually Jones's own secretary, secretly disguised to manufacture his divinity. He even performed grotesque medical theater, where he appeared to physically pull cancerous tumors directly from people's bodies. By fabricating these supernatural feats, Jones completely overwhelmed his followers' logical defenses. Once he secured their unquestioning faith, he demanded everything they had, convincing elderly members to sign over their pensions, their homes, and their entire life savings. Look at this timeline. Jones systematically destroyed his followers' ability to think critically through sleep deprivation, forcing them to stay awake for 6 days straight. That permanent exhaustion broke them, trapping them in a mental cage, rendering them incapable of questioning his contradictory rules. With their defenses shattered, he asserted total physical dominance. Those who dared to question him faced brutal public beatings before the entire congregation. He used horrific public sexual humiliation to crush whatever individual identity they had left. The psychological climax of this conditioning arrived during a New Year's Eve celebration. Jones passed out a drink, calmly watched his followers consume it, and then calmly announced it was poison. Mothers screamed in agony as panic swept the room, only for Jones to smile and chillingly reveal it was entirely fake, a test of their loyalty. This horrific abuse was a highly calculated desensitization program. He was methodically conditioning exhausted people to accept death on his command. In 1977, terrified that an upcoming magazine article would expose his abuse, Jones panicked. He triggered a sudden mass exodus, moving hundreds of followers out of the United States and deep into South America. The followers thought they were finally escaping to a peaceful tropical utopia. In reality, they had completely financed their own entrapment. The settlement, known as Jonestown, was surrounded by 300 miles of unforgiving rainforest and guarded by armed men with machetes. There was no peace. Instead, they endured relentless auditory torture. Jones broadcasted his own slurred, drug-fueled voice 24 hours a day, slowly driving the captives toward insanity. The physical isolation of the hostile rainforest finally matched the inescapable psychological cage he had meticulously built in their minds. Rumors of the horrific conditions in the jungle eventually leaked back to the United States. In November 1978, California Congressman Leo Ryan launched a desperate fact-finding mission and flew directly into the camp. When Ryan and a group of journalists arrived, Jones violently orchestrated a joyful reception. He forced his exhausted captives to smile, sing, and feign happiness for the visiting news cameras. But the illusion shattered the very next day. A terrified follower secretly slipped a handwritten plea for rescue into the fold of an NBC reporter's arm. Suddenly, dozens of desperate people stepped forward, pleading to leave. Enraged, Jones watched the defectors leave for the nearby Port Kaituma airstrip. As Congressman Ryan and the fleeing families prepared to board their planes, heavily armed guards from Jonestown ambushed them, slaughtering the congressman and 3 reporters in the dirt. The moment the outside world punctured his absolute power, Jones's paranoia transitioned the movement from a psychological trap into a physical slaughterhouse. Back at the camp, Jones called everyone to the central pavilion and delivered his final apocalyptic lie. He told them the military was coming to torture their children, and that their only option was a revolutionary suicide. There was nowhere to run. Armed guards physically encircled the terrified men, women, and children, cutting off any possible chance of escape into the jungle. A large metal vat was brought forward, filled with a fruit drink laced with a lethal dose of cyanide. Nurses and guards moved aggressively through the crowd, taking newborn babies directly from their weeping mothers' arms and squirting the deadly poison straight into the infants' mouths. Parents watched their own children go into violent convulsions. Over 900 people died in the dirt, trapped together while Jim Jones's voice boomed over the speakers until the very end. Jonestown stands as a warning about the ultimate betrayal of ordinary people who surrendered their absolute trust to a monster who locked them inside his own personal hell.